tell Jack about the dowry.
Welcome to the Progress Texas Happy Hour.
Welcome back to the Progress Texas Happy Hour. I'm podcasting director Chris Mosier.
And I'm Reagan Stone, Advocacy Director with Progress Texas. Good to be with you today, Chris.
Likewise, sir. Today's conversation is part of our ongoing series with Democratic lawmakers in Texas in advance of the 2025 legislative session. What's ahead and what's at stake for our state as the second Trump administration begins. And we're proud to be joined by our good friend, Representative Vikki Goodwin, who is beginning her fourth term in the Texas House, representing parts of Austin, Bee Cave, and Lake Travis. She is originally from Dallas, but moved to Austin to attend the University of Texas in the mid-'80s, and like many Longhorns, she made that move permanent. She is a real estate professional by trade and has worked to protect our public schools, small businesses, and in health and public safety advocacy since she flipped her seat from red to blue back in 2018. Representative Vikki Goodwin, it's great to see you again.
Thank you, Chris. It's great to be here.
Let's start with how you're viewing the election we've just gone through. We're here to talk about what's coming up, but please share your thoughts on what went wrong for Democrats and what the progressive side needs to adjust for the next go-round.
Sure. Well, if I may just start off with my current mantra, because I think it might set the tone. Hope for the best, plan for the worst, and prepare for 2026. So
Amen.
What went wrong for Democrats in 2024? Honestly, I'm still scratching my head a little bit because I felt like we had a great message around supporting our public schools. Like in Texas, that's such a huge issue. But even all across the United States, we're seeing so many different states choosing to privatize or send public tax dollars to support private schools, sending kids to, religious schools or whatever. And so I think that's something that's so critically important, is having a good foundation of public schools. And so to me, that is one of the most important issues. And many of our candidates, Democratic candidates throughout the state, were talking about that. But it didn't seem to break through. Also, women's reproductive rights and what's happening in Texas because we have a total abortion ban. That obviously was a huge message. And yet, even after the election, in talking to people who aren't as politically involved, there's still a misunderstanding. People out there still believe, even in Texas, that there are exceptions for rape and incest. They believe that women are going to get the health care that they need, even if they're going through a miscarriage. And unfortunately, that's not true. So I think we have the right messages. Democrats care about the things that your average everyday Texan cares about and things that will help them, but we're just somehow not breaking through. We tend to get in our bubbles, and everybody that we're in the room with is shaking their head. Yes, we like what you're saying, but somehow we're just not getting out to the majority of Texans who really don't want to pay attention to politics because they think it's too divisive. And so they're not hearing our message. And that's what we've got to figure out going forward in 2026. How do we talk to people who are not paying attention to politics?
Absolutely. Finding common ground. Of course, we can look back to what happened to all the rural Republican lawmakers who had the guts to stand up to the voucher fight that Greg Abbott has put on. Many of them ended up primaried out, and a lot of those local races were not about public schools. They were about immigration, or they were about some other social, divisive sort of issue. And so we're up against, not only are we up against, but also people like you're talking about, Representative Goodwin, who are not very acutely tuned in to all of this, are easily kind of misdirected away from the issues that actually affect their lives into these things that are much more, again, culture war sort of items. And so that takes us to kind of the fight ahead and moving our focus forward as we wanted to do on this series. Republicans these days here in Texas are more emboldened than they ever have been with the Trump win, and we can expect that to be the tone as we move into the new session. So, Rep. Goodwin, what do you expect in terms of the Democratic Party's overall situation in the upcoming session, and more specifically, what challenges do you personally expect to face?
So it's going to be tough. I mean, I will just say that what makes me hopeful is that there are a lot of issues that are very bipartisan that Even the Republican side recognized we need to work on things like housing affordability, on water infrastructure, on childcare, energy. There's just a lot of issues that are going to need a lot of work this next session. So I do think there will be work across party lines, but it's not going to be easy for Democrats to get their bills passed. So it may be that we have to do things like add amendments to Republican bills. I would even be willing to have a Republican carry my priorities through their bills just to get some good things done. But I think this is going to be a tough session because the way it's starting out with our speaker race is just showing us that it's going to be contentious.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And one of those issues that you were mentioning towards the beginning was definitely, reproductive rights or reproductive freedom is definitely the way we've been messaging that here at Progress Texas. Republicans appear likely to expand their assault on Texas women by further limiting access to abortion. One of those, for instance, is a freshman's bill targeting access to life-saving abortion drugs that are used in miscarriage care, contraceptives, and even no-fault divorce is being discussed in some of their ranks as well. Where do you see that fight heading?
Unfortunately, I'm not sure that we're going to make a lot of headway on that issue. I filed a bill that just says that women that are going through a miscarriage can have their doctor give them the health care they need. Because, unfortunately, you say the word abortion and the majority of the legislature is going to push back and say, yeah, we're not touching that. In fact, like you mentioned, they want to go even further in banning certain drugs that are used not just for abortion, but they're used for other things. And we've already seen that happening. My fear is that, contraception will become harder. And we've seen that even though it's not currently banned, there's some people out there in the state of Texas who think that they can't get contraceptive drugs. So, and we've shut down some Planned Parenthoods, and so where they normally would have gone to get contraceptive drugs, they are no longer there for them. So that's going to be a huge challenge. We do hear from a lot of doctors who are saying this is a problem, that women aren't able to get the health care they need, that doctors aren't willing to come here for residency programs if they're OB-GYNs, and that some OB-GYNs have left the state or retired out of fear of the repercussions of the current law. So this is one issue that I just think is going to be really tough for us to make progress on. But obviously the Texas Women's Health Caucus is working on the issue to see where we can chip away.
Very good. Representative Goodwin, pivoting to immigration here, how do you expect the huge deportation program that's been threatened, I've started to say promised, but kind of more threatened from the Trump administration, how do we expect that to play out here in Texas? Do you have any advice that you might offer to Texas families, in particular of mixed immigration status, who might find themselves in the crosshairs of that, and what can just everyday people like all of us do to support people who may find themselves targeted by that operation?
Yeah, once again, I go back to my mantra of hope for the best, but plan for the worst. I think that this is another issue where we don't have the numbers. The Democrats don't have the numbers to stop what the Republican priorities are. And even last night, I was at an event, business event, where some business leaders were saying that this is going to be really detrimental to our economy, deporting people out of the state when we have so much need for workers. We have need for construction workers, agricultural workers, hospitality workers. Across the spectrum, we have the need for these people to be here and working productively. And so deporting people is not the right answer. But unfortunately, Trump has said this is one of his main priorities, one of his first priorities. So I think we have to be realistic. I have an immigration attorney who is my chief of staff, actually, Pooja Sethi, and
Yep.
I asked her, what advice would you give? And so here are a few things that she said to me were, for people who are concerned, they should reach out to an attorney and make sure that maybe there are some options for them to, just to be here legally to get their paperwork in order, make sure that they have passports and any other documentation that is current, not expired, to make sure that they do have a plan for kids or family or loved ones to know where their documents are, to know what happens if a situation arises where a family member is deported. How do we take care of the other family members? So that was her advice, that really seek the advice of an attorney if you can. And there are some organizations that provide those services pro bono if you don't have the means. So that would be the advice. I don't know how Democrats are going to stave off the bad bills, but maybe bringing in the business community, because again, I think they understand that deporting hundreds of thousands or 1 million people is going to be so incredibly detrimental to our economy.
Super disruptive, and depending on where you live, this is going to be, if they're doing it to the scale they say they're going to do it, it's going to be perfectly evident right there in your neighborhood as well. Really scary stuff. And let me note that Pooja Sethi, who you mentioned, she is still the head of the Travis County Democratic Party. I'm pretty sure the chair of that.
Yes.
Very good. And she's a great fighter and a very super cool person. But that advice that she offers, think about how grim that is. Think about, any of us who have kids, imagining having to make advanced preparations for in case you suddenly disappear from the lives of your kids. That is, just from a human level, is amazingly grim.
It's horrific. It's very sad. And, I will do everything I can to be helpful, but it's going to be pretty horrible.
Yeah, and moving on to another topic that definitely affects all Texans, healthcare, definitely in the news right now as well. There's been a lot of, I would say, public disapproval of the for-profit healthcare industry, and even some bipartisan disapproval of that. Texas is already, as you know, dead last in healthcare coverage overall. The state hasn't, of course, expanded Medicaid, and we are one of the largest states that have the most people on Medicaid, mostly covering, of course, children and the elderly, and as well as those that are below the poverty line. I believe that's also been expanded to pregnant mothers in the last session or so as well. But it's been neglected for those lower income of expanding that upwards to be able to increase the number of folks that could be on that. Under Donald Trump and Elon Musk, we even see that line perhaps falling into jeopardy even further. What do you see coming around healthcare for Texans, and do you see anything surrounding that expansion of Medicaid?
Well, I mean, that was great that we did allow women who have given birth to stay on Medicaid for a year after giving birth, which is wonderful. But unfortunately, the bad news is that I recently heard from someone that a lot of the providers have been taken off the rolls. So we often hear about how women or children are removed from the Medicaid rolls. This time we're hearing that also the providers are, which is just really unfortunate, because if they are removed, they can't provide services. And I heard that there were over 600 doctors that happened to, doctors and other healthcare providers. Unfortunately, I don't see any change in the Republican position, which has been ever since Obamacare came about, that they were not in favor of bringing more Medicaid dollars from the federal government to Texas, which is so unfortunate. Those are our tax dollars. They're going to other states. Just almost every other state has expanded their Medicaid program. And so they're basically getting Texas dollars. And so we should absolutely be bringing them back here to Texas to help people. I think most people understand the idea that prevention is so much less expensive. So if you have someone going to their primary care doctor, you're going to keep them out of the emergency room, which is so much more expensive. And so it makes all the sense in the world to expand Medicaid, but I don't see the Republicans changing their position on that. We've tried some little things to chip away. For example, last session, Representative Tallarico had a bill to limit the price of insulin. But what we find oftentimes is that we might pass a bill here in Texas that does things to keep costs down, but it's a federal law. And so our laws actually don't get implemented because of an overriding federal law. Right. So I think what we need to do is reach out to our federal partners And, this is going to be a tough few years for people that don't have health insurance, I think is the honest truth.
Well, health insurance, of course, has been central to recent conversations. With things that have happened in the news, there's been kind of this, I think, surprising to a lot of us, very widespread and definitely bipartisan sort of backlash against the for-profit health insurance industry, which to me signals that there perhaps is some common ground that can be navigated by our side to kind of get our messages across to people who have not quite decided that they agree with this yet. And Congressman Greg Casar has talked lately loosely about that, but more broadly about the importance for progressive people to take care to cut past the culture war distractions that come our way from our opposition, and to focus on the fact that any of these issues that we're talking about, healthcare, reproductive care, immigration, all of them have a class component that may provide an avenue by which we can have a broader and more meaningful discussion with other people of different political views. So tell us about that, Rep. Goodwin. In your view, how should everyday working Texans of either party or any political stripe be viewing matters of economy and opportunity?
It seems logical that we would want to tax the billionaires and use that revenue for things that we need, healthcare, childcare, what have you. But you use the word tax, and that's another thing that the Republicans are going to push back against. So that's a challenge. But I do think that that's one of the biggest issues that we face, is that we have such a small percentage of our population holding such a large percentage of the wealth in the country. And so there are some ideas this session that I've been in some working groups looking at childcare, looking at water infrastructure, looking at housing affordability. And so some of these ideas are going to require revenue from the state. Oftentimes, the state relies heavily on federal funds to pass through to local governments to use on things like childcare, homelessness, things like that. But I think that the state also has to step up and look at addressing some of these issues with state dollars. We have, a very prosperous state at the moment. We've got some surplus money. Last session, we had the idea of appropriating more dollars to our public schools, but that got caught up in a fight. But I do think that there is some will across lines to put money into some of these things that need the money. So I've actually been hearing about childcare and having the state pitch in, doing a tri-share program where it would be employee, employer, and state dollars in a fund to help leverage some money to help more people be able to access the childcare that they need so they can be in the workforce.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And from some of my background, I know in your home county, there's just been a county vote that passed where there is now childcare in Travis County. And so it would be really neat to get to see that go across the state, because some of those costs can be, tens of thousands of dollars for high quality childcare. Do you have any other legislative priorities we haven't spoken about today? And whether that's stopping a bad bill or promoting a good one, is there any specific priorities that you'd like to be able to highlight?
Yeah, sure. I mean, always first top of mind is going to be our public schools, making sure we increase the basic allotment, the money that we're sending to our schools. So that's always number one for me. But in addition to that, I've got one bill that allows for downward pressure on rent prices, with the idea that if renters are paying less on rent, they can save some money and hopefully one day be able to buy a home. That is my Fair Rent Incentive Act. Right now, we're giving landlords an assessment cap, which keeps their property taxes slightly lower. But we have no string attached to that. So my bill would simply say, let's put a string attached that they get that assessment cap only if they are charging fair market rent or below. And that's determined already by HUD. There's a table out there, you can Google it, fair market rent. And it's determined by zip code and the number of bedrooms, based on the idea people shouldn't be spending more than 30% of their income on rent. And then I've got several bills around water. We have a groundwater conservation district within my district that we're trying to just slightly increase their revenue so that they can hire a scientist and do more research on how much water is in the aquifer. And then we have a number of conservation measures partly education. So I'm really happy to hear that the realtors are already working on the issue of educating buyers, home buyers, more about where their drinking water comes from, with the idea that if you understand where your water is coming from, you might be a little more conservative in your usage. So a lot of ideas around water, housing affordability, and then childcare as well. And then I've always worked on public safety. I will continue to work on the issue of how can we make our community safer with the guns that we have out there. And so we've got some bills that we're filing on that as well.
Rep Goodwin, coming up on the close here, progressives in Texas, I think especially those of us who are dialed in pretty closely, are starting to get over the shock of the election and beginning to focus on the fight ahead, as we've been talking about here. But there is still a fair amount of fear out there about what's coming. Can you offer progressive folks some words of encouragement for this next little era we're about to emerge into?
What comes to mind is last night I went to this dinner and I was sitting next to a couple of pretty staunch Republicans, and we found some common ground. And I always feel like there's always somewhere that we can find common ground, and that's just what we have to commit to, is reaching across and finding out where we can agree on things. And what they were talking to me about is campaign finance reform, which is really critical because we've seen how money has bought elections. And if we can finally have some campaign finance reform, that would potentially help us in the election cycle. So I'm always hopeful. Also, outgoing Speaker Phelan put together some work groups. They are bipartisan work groups. So again, I joined 3, but he put together quite a few of them. And we've had some really great conversations around these really important issues in the state of Texas. So while usually what's in the news is how contentious things are in the Texas Legislature or in Congress, there really is a lot of work behind the scenes that's across the aisle work. And I will just end with, I think it was last night I saw or read in the paper something about Ted Cruz and some Democrats working on a bill together. So, again, it's hard to imagine sometimes some of the Republicans that we work with, but there's always some common ground, and I'm dedicated to finding that common ground and moving things forward.
A pleasure as always, Representative Vikki Goodwin. Thanks so much for spending some time with us, and best of luck in the session, and let us know what we can do to help you out.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Reagan.
Very, very good. So here at Progress Texas, we're in the business of countering the conservative disinformation machine that's largely responsible for the mess that we're all in right now. While that machine is funded by oil billionaires and tech billionaires and religious right-wing groups and more, we rely mostly on everyday Texans just like you who value our work and share our belief that a Texas that works for everybody is the Texas that we prefer to live in. So we don't do subscriptions, we don't do paywalls, because we believe the message of progress is one that everyone should be able to access, learn from, and act upon, most importantly. So if you've become a regular listener, we appreciate it, and we could use your support. No amount is too small. Go to progresstexas.org/donate. We want to thank our good friends Sharon Guild-Stitt, Stephanie Evans, and Michelle Mapes for having done so lately. Also, thanks to our friends who have pitched in for our holiday fundraising parties for 2024. Top of the list is the Honorable Vikki Goodwin. Thank you, Representative, for helping us out there. The Honorable Joaquin Castro, Peter Krause, Yasmin Simon, and Jim Fletcher also on that list. Thanks so much for your valued and ongoing support. Again, you can help us out at progresstexas.org/donate. Thanks so much for listening and for all you do to press progress forward here in the Lone Star State, and we'll see you next time.